In staphylococcal food poisoning, Staphylococcus aureus, which is a very common microorganism present as a normal flora of the skin of humans, is responsible for food poisoning. The common sources of Staphylococcus aureus are the human body itself, especially nose, mouth, skin, and any cuts and boils. Understand here that a person who is working with processing of the food in the kitchen, male or female, they have to constantly encounter peeling, crushing, cutting of the food products, and for that they have to use sharp objects. Also, they are constantly exposed to steam and boiling conditions, so there can be cuts on the skin, finger, or the any part of the hand, and then there can be boils. When this leads to an injury, when the processing of the food, if not done carefully and with a calm state of mind or with some knowledge of food preparation, if it is not done, then there will be cuts and wounds and boils. Immediately Staphylococcus aureus will gain entry, which is a normal flora of the skin, and it is also wound bacteria. Infection in wounds is due to Staphylococcus aureus. Now this Staphylococcus aureus gives rise to pus formation. This pus, in the pus you will find enterotoxins, and that is very lethal. So cold meat, poultry and dairy products are also some common sources. Main source is the human body itself, as I said. Second, cold meat, poultry, dairy products, and anything which is touched by hand, handled by someone who is infected with Staphylococcus aureus bacteria, can become a source of contamination and thus the cause of food poisoning. Untreated raw milk is also one of the source, because the skin of the cow or the buffalo, the milkman who is there, who is handling this, they can become source. This can be more aggravated if the milk is not pasteurized, not treated, at least a flash pasteurization 71.7 degrees for 15 seconds, which is usually practiced in the dairy before disposing of, to kill the bacteria. This also extends the shelf life of product. Now some of the common symptoms of Staphylococcus aureus infection are same as that of the salmonellosis: abdominal pains, vomiting, low temperature, and the onset for this is 1 to 6 hours after consumption of contaminated foods. So the staphylococcal food poisoning is basically a foodborne intoxication because the enterotoxins, staphylococcal enterotoxins, are responsible for the food poisoning. Often it is abrupt and severe on onset, means you cannot predict when this onset will take place. It's abrupt in nature and the onset becomes very severe because toxins are involved along with the bacteria. So it is a food infection as well as food intoxication, both food poisoning and food infection both. The resultant onset or symptom is nausea, diarrhea, and abdominal pains, vomiting and fever. This is caused by the enterotoxins which are there, and the protein enterotoxins released during the growth of Staphylococcus aureus is responsible for food poisoning. The amount of contaminated food which is consumed determines the severity of the illness. Means how severe a person can be infected depends upon how much amount of contamination has gone through the food, or if the contamination level is less, as I talked about the lethal dose or the infectious dose, that also is very important here. Amount of toxin in the food which was there present at the time of consumption of food is also determinantal for the severity of the disease. General health of the victim, whether he is immunocompromised or let us say low in immunity. Notice the age: older persons and younger infants, they are very susceptible to staphylococcal food poisoning. Staphylococcus aureus, you can see on the screen, it is a microorganism which grows by giving yellow colored pigmentation on the agar. The higher amount of salt can be added in nutrient agar, and you can check the growth of Staphylococcus aureus. Somewhat opaque to yellowish are the colonies. They are circular. They are microscopic gram positive cocci in clusters. The symptoms, as I said, it is very common, and the origin of Staphylococcus aureus is from humans and animals. Primary reservoirs are humans themselves. Those humans who are having cuts and wounds on their hands, in the skin, or the animals who are having cuts and wounds, processing the meat results into wounds on the animal. So that time duration of processing the meat of animals as well as the condition of the humans plays a very important role in the food poisoning. 50% of the humans, they carry Staphylococcus aureus in their nostrils, on their skin and on their hair. So if you see the flow sheet here, in 5 steps we can understand the Staphylococcus infection. Food which is containing protein is usually cooked and the bacteria, they are killed. Protein here, it means the enterotoxin. See the meat products, they are usually naturally contaminated with Staphylococcus aureus, and it secretes enterotoxin. But that enterotoxin can be heated, bacteria will be killed, the toxin may remain but it may not be that lethal. Secondly, the food, when it comes in contact with the worker, that worker, if is contaminated with staphylococci on his hands, then the infectious bacteria may be transferred onto the food. When it is kept at a room temperature for long duration of time, that infected food may allow the growth of Staphylococcus aureus. Organisms, they get incubated in the food. That is, the temperature, it is called as temperature abuse. If it is long enough, then toxins are released, and reheating will kill the staphylococci but not the toxin. This is very important. Food containing toxins, when they are consumed, then after around 6 hours, the onset of the symptoms, that is abdominal pain, vomiting, etc., will be there, and that we call it as a staphylococcal intoxication. The properties of this staphylococcal enterotoxin, if you see how it causes disease, because it is resistant to heat and temperature. As I just said, the bacteria will be killed but not the toxin. It will not be removed. It is stable over a wide pH range. It is resistant to heat temperature. It is stable throughout 1 to 13 degrees. It can sustain the pH conditions, and it is resistant to gastrointestinal salts and chemicals like the bile salt, etc., and other proteases which are present, which can degrade. Enterotoxin is a protein. If protease is acted upon it, that protein will be removed, but that doesn't take place here as it is resistant to proteases. Some of the common foods which are sources or where this takes place very easily, that is the toxin sustains the food, is meat, poultry, some salads, ice creams, pastries. Toxin remains, bacteria can be removed but the toxin remains. Properties of food which typically gets implicated are any food which is high in protein content will have a stable enterotoxin inside it. Then those foods which require considerable handling during preparation, like if you see the bread preparation, duff is there, which the duff has to be squeezed by hands, chapati hands, where excessive handling, hands are to be used, that is prone to contamination. And if there are foods which are left at room temperature after cooking and there is a huge time between the leftover food and the consumption, and if it is not heated before eating, again reheating, then there is staphylococcal infection very commonly taking place. The mechanism of this staphylococcal enterotoxin is by immune response. What does this toxin do? See, the staphylococcal bacteria, cocci, they penetrate to the gut lining. They overcome the acidic barrier, they go to the gut lining and they activate the local and systemic immune response. The immune response instantly comes into flow, but when they overcome the immune response, after billion cells are formed or many cells are formed, they overcome the immune response, and then the body, it releases inflammatory mediators. Due to immune response, inflammatory mediators are released, and suddenly you see in this picture what is happening from the gut. In the stomach it passes, it goes to the gut, and it's the enterotoxins, they release inflammatory mediators which transmit the signal of vomit to the center in the brain. You may have seen that when a person falls on the head, he vomits. Why? Because there is a signal here, vomit signal, and that is a defense mechanism, an indication that something is not proper, it is not good. So stimulation of the vagus nerve takes place due to this enterotoxin, and suddenly vomiting starts. Vomiting is one of the major symptom of staphylococcal enterotoxin, and this is what you have seen here. This is the mechanism of this enterotoxin. The methods to control, or what precautions have to be taken for Staphylococcus aureus food poisoning to be avoided, is very simple. As I am again and again telling you, is that this is a common sense based mechanism rather than medicinal. Of course, once the onset is severe, you have to take medicines and take proper advice, but before that, precaution is always better than cure. In order to reduce the risk of Staphylococcus aureus food poisoning, you can effectively follow personal hygiene. Anyone who is handling, preparing or cooking the food should keep themselves very clean, wash their hands regularly, wear clean clothes, tie up their long hairs, and all this. They should not have injuries on their hands and skin. Cuts should be covered with proper bandages, gloves. It should be cleaned with clean water, and dressing should be proper. Coughing and sneezing should be not there in the region where food is being processed or cooked. Coughing and sneezing over the food is never recommended. It should not be allowed. Covering of the hands, nose blowing, healthy practices. As I said, common sense prevails everything else. So this is how the control can be done. Next, we will be discussing the bacterial food poisoning, that is botulism, which is caused by Clostridium botulinum. Botulism can be very deadly, and it is caused by Clostridium botulism. Bacterial food poisoning by botulism. See next. Botulism is derived, the name botulism is derived from a Latin word sausage. Sauces and sausages, these are foods, and infection originated from there. Sausage is called as botulus. From there the word botulism is derived. It is one of the most serious types, though it occurs very rarely. It is very serious in nature, and it kills about 2/3 of the victims. Means the mortality rate is high when there is food poisoning, when there is botulism, and when Clostridium botulinum they infect the food. The source from where these bacteria are added, the bacteria is widely distributed in soil. Clostridium botulinum is present in soil, dust, and intestinal tract of animals. The organism enters into the food as spores. Now this is one of the most dangerous aspects of Clostridium botulinum. The spores, they remain for many days, many months they may remain, and after getting favorable conditions they may germinate, and the large amount of vegetative growth results into the toxin being secreted. The food responsible for botulism are preserved home foods such as canned vegetables. We don't have this system in our country. Western people, they usually have vegetables canned and putting in the refrigerator. They open the can and then use it for cooking. So canned vegetables is one, because spores they remain in the canned vegetables. Vegetables, they are coming from soil, and with the soil, if proper packing is not there, it can remain in the soil, spores will remain, and Clostridium botulinum can germinate. Smoked or pickled fishes can be great source of this organism. Homemade cheese, because when making cheese in home, good healthy practices are not followed, and as it is a complete food, milk, there is a huge chance that this organism may be added through the unhealthy practices. Other low acidic foods, whatever the low acidic foods are there, low in acids. Buttermilk is there, and all acidic content foods can be good sources of Clostridium botulinum. If you see the microbiological perspective of Clostridium botulinum, the toxin is produced by a bacteria called as Clostridium botulinum, which is an anaerobic gram-positive rod-shaped bacteria. It is anaerobic, that makes itself more dangerous. It can survive in conditions where oxygen is less. The bacteria, they are 0.5 to 2 micrometers in width and 1.6 to 22 micrometers in length. They create spores which can remain from 30 hours to 30 years. The spores are heavily resistant to environmental stress conditions like heat, ultraviolet light, low oxygen conditions, etc. And that makes this organism very deadly and dangerous. I repeat once again, botulism food poisoning is rare, but once it occurs, the mortality rate or the death rate is very high. The main agent in this process is the botulinum toxin. It is called as BTX. This is secreted by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum, and as it grows, the lethal dose goes on increasing naturally. One bacteria containing 1 BTX is less as compared to 10 bacteria, because 10 bacteria itself will secrete multiplied by 10 times of botulinum toxin. This is a neurotoxic protein. Botulinum toxin is divided into 8 neurotoxins. All these 8, they have different types of neurotoxic actions. These 8 neurotoxins are neurotoxin A, neurotoxin B, neurotoxin C, D, E, F, G and H. These are all antigenically and serologically distinct, but structurally they are similar. Means the amount of titer you get, or the amount of the nature of antigen antibody reaction is different, but structurally all are similar. Discovery of H toxin, the last one took place in 2013. It is an exotoxin, means secreted outside the microorganism. Clostridium botulinum produces the toxin and it secretes outside. This exotoxin is generally A, B or E, which is causing toxicity in humans. The humans, they are very susceptible to A, B and E type of exotoxin produced by Clostridium botulinum. Clostridium botulinum C and D, they cause toxicity in animals but not in humans. This point has to be understood. The toxic effect is on the neurons or the it is a neurotoxin. Neurotoxins are toxins which are destructive to the nerve cells or the nerve tissues. Neurotoxins, they are an extensive class of exogenous neurological chemicals. These are chemicals which adversely affect the function in both developing and mature nervous tissues. The nerve cells which are there, they are severely affected. Paralysis may be caused, improper brain functioning, then death may also be there. So it is one of the most serious type of food infection in the human history. The mechanism of action: under suitable anaerobic condition, the toxins will be secreted in the foods, and it acts on the parasympathetic nervous system. Its action on the gastrointestinal tract is very slight or not there. Even though if it is there in the ingested in the gastrointestinal tract, like we saw in the case of Staphylococcus aureus and Salmonella, it mainly acts on the GI. But this Clostridium botulinum, it is mainly attacking the nervous system, and the action is on parasympathetic nervous system. Botulinum toxin is one of the most powerful known toxins in the human history. As I just said, 1 microgram can kill a human. 1 microgram of toxin. Of course, to synthesize 1 microgram of toxin inside your body, you will need billions and billions cells of Clostridium botulinum. But that much amount of growth doesn't take place, but that is quite possible if, as I said, if the organism is growing in a canned food for years together. If the shelf life is, let us say, expiry date is 1 year, and for 12 months the spores grows inside it, the spores is there, it germinates and vegetative cells are formed and they give rise to toxin. And if you consume such canned foods, then there is a chance of this food poisoning. Incubation takes place in 12 to 36 hours, and various types of clinical manifestations are there. You may study this in immunology or medical microbiology. Here we are having a perspective of food microbiology, therefore only that much I will be telling you. As I said, it is one of the most powerful and toxic, lethal toxin secreting bacteria known to man. 1 microgram can kill a human, complete healthy human. It acts initially on the nervous system by blocking the nerve functioning. It excretes a excitatory neurotransmitter called as acetylcholine, and it releases from the presynaptic membrane of the neuromuscular junction, and the activity, that is the neural activity, is completely halted and blocked, and then further it deteriorates and results into the death of the consumer. The characteristics of Clostridium botulinum, if you see the organism itself, it is a gram positive anaerobic bacilli. It is spore forming, it is toxin forming, it is heat sensitive. Organism is heat sensitive, toxin is not. It prefers a low acidic environment. So basically the acidic environment of the stomach is the first barrier for that. But if you consume toxin, then you will be infected. It has a capacity to cause botulism disease. Characteristic features of botulism toxin, you can see it is thermolabile. Unlike the earlier one, this is thermolabile, means it will be destroyed at high temperatures. Therefore, as I said, it is not a very common disease, but once it happens, the mortality rate is very high. Foods contaminated with botulism toxins, if they are heated for 100 degrees centigrade for few minutes, then it is safe for consumption. So cooled foods, non-cooked foods, street foods which are lying there from morning to evening without cooking or reheating, they are very risky for consumption. The prevention of this disease is can be done by following steps. The recommended prevention measure for infant botulism, means those kids who are getting infected with botulism, is to avoid giving honey in less than 12 months. आपल्याकडे मध चाटवतात लहान लेकराला, छोटे बच्चों को शहद चटाते. This is a very unhealthy practice. It has to be, if that is hands of the persons are clean and the source of the honey is clean, etc., then it's no issue. But nobody follows those. Not everybody is a microbiologist, understand that thing. Not every person out there is a microbiologist. It needs a great level of understanding, common sense and skills to understand what has to be done and what not has to be done when it comes to ingestion of things like food. So a small infant, if it is made to lick honey of less than 12 months, then botulism spores are often present in honey and they may give rise to very toxic reactions. In older children and adults, the normal intestinal bacteria, it suppresses the development of Clostridium botulinum. Means recall our earlier lecture of good bacteria, probiotics. If you consume more probiotics, then this Clostridium botulinum growth can be easily controlled. Commercially canned goods are very good sources of this infection, so they should undergo a process called as botulinum cook. What is botulinum cook? It is pressurizing in the cooker at 121 degrees centigrade for 3 minutes. If you cook it, then Clostridium botulinum and its toxin both will be killed, so it becomes safe. So we come to the end of food poisoning discussion. At this, I would like to tell you one very important thing, that not only these 3 infections are the common and prevailing infections in your life, there are other foodborne infections also in the human lifetime. Hundreds and thousands of infections, foodborne infections can occur. Common sense needs to prevail to control these infections. Viral, poliomyelitis, hepatitis A and hepatitis E, these are foodborne. In the bacterial, typhoid, paratyphoid, brucellosis, diarrheal diseases, food poisoning, dysentery, diarrhea. In children, infantile diarrhea, cholera, all are foodborne. Waterborne or foodborne. Water is also a part and parcel of the food. Parasitic, ascariasis, enterobiasis, amoebic dysentery, atrophiasis, fasciolasis, hydatid cysts, giardiasis, toxoplasmosis. These are all the foodborne infections, and these infections can be avoided by using common sense. The best technology is the common sense technology, personal hygiene technology. You see, nothing is having a permanent life. Everything comes with an expiry date. Why that much? You are bathing. You bath daily. Why? Because the expiry date is 24 hours. Once I take a bath today, it comes with an expiry date, 24 hours. After 24 hours, I have to take a bath again. I have to brush my mouth again. I have to, just like that, washing your hands. The expiry date is couple of hours. In such conditions, I'm not telling daily without any reason go and wash your hands. You may be, so if somebody is doing that, he may be suffering from OCD. Don't do that. That is a mental disorder. But a person who is working in a kitchen, a person who is working with food processing units and foods for 24 hours, he needs to clean the hands. He needs to cover here his head with some gear, so that you have chefs have that headgear. Why? The hairs should not fall. Their nails, just take a look at your nails. If your nails are dirty, then the nails of the person who is punching the pani puri a hole for water to be added, again water he is mixing with his own hands. Unhygienic practices are one of the major causes for foodborne infections and food poisoning, and that can be avoided by common sense. So having said that, now there are certain food preservation techniques which we will deal in our next lecture. Food preservation starts from basic common methods or practices in the house to industrial level. Huge industrial mechanisms and machines are involved. In our next lecture, we will be seeing that. Till then, study hard. As I said, take down notes, pause wherever needed, rewind wherever needed, listen again, listen a couple of times, and then you have got the information, the knowledge and the wisdom of food microbiology.